The flight attendant put a napkin on my tray table. Her hands were shaking. Written in fast handwriting were the words, "Fake that you are sick. Get off this plane right now." I looked up at her in shock. Her eyes were not filled with annoyance or confusion. They were filled with total panic and fear. She leaned closer and whispered, "Please, I'm begging you." At that moment, I didn't know if this was a joke, an error, or something much more serious. But what happened just 2 hours later proved one thing. Her warning wasn't just real. It was the reason I'm still alive today. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe and comment where you're watching from. This story could happen to anyone. My name is Neala Juba. I'm a 30-year-old travel nurse who has seen enough human pain for a lifetime. I've held the hands of patients taking their last breaths. I've comforted families in hospital hallways. After months of non-stop work, I decided to take a short break and surprise my mother in New York. She had just gotten better from heart surgery, and she kept saying my voice was helping her heal faster. I couldn't wait to see her face when I showed up without telling her. It was a normal afternoon at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, ATL. People were laughing. Kids were pressing their faces against the terminal windows watching the planes move, and business travelers were typing away on their laptops. I felt tired but calm. I whispered a quick prayer of thanks because life was finally starting to feel stable again. As I got on the flight, I noticed the flight attendants greeting passengers with practiced smiles. But one of them, her name tag read Asha, was different. She wasn't just polite, she was watching. Her eyes looked at every person boarding, as if she were memorizing faces. When our eyes met, she paused for half a second, almost as if she recognized me, and then quickly looked away. My seat was near the middle of the aisle. Across from me sat a man in a black jacket who kept moving nervously. He opened the overhead compartment 2 times, even though he wasn't putting anything inside. Next to him, a quiet teenager hugged a backpack close to his chest. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, but the feeling wasn't the usual pre-flight talking. There was a hidden tension, like a quiet storm building under clear skies. I texted my sister Zola. Got on the flight. Mom has no idea I'm coming. Get ready to film her reaction. She replied with heart emojis and reminders to bring her the special sweet potato cookies from the airport bakery. Everything felt quite normal as I fastened my seatbelt and adjusted it. But then I noticed Asha again. She moved slowly down the aisle, pretending to check the overhead bins, but her eyes weren't on the luggage. They were on the people. She looked terrified of someone, but I couldn't tell who. As she reached my row, she leaned down as if putting a napkin on my tray. She never made eye contact, never changed her expression, and then kept walking. Open the napkin. You're not safe. Fake that you are sick. Get off this plane immediately. Fake that you are sick. Get off this plane immediately. My mind went empty. For 1 second I thought it was a joke. Maybe someone was filming reactions for a social experiment. Maybe this was some kind of mistake. But when I looked back at Asha, she had stopped at the end of the aisle. She turned slowly and fixed her eyes on me. There was no humor on her face, no confusion, just urgency. My heart began to beat fast. I looked around to see if anyone else had gotten a napkin. Everyone seemed calm. No one else seemed worried. Something was happening, and I was the only passenger being warned. I didn't know what to believe, but one thing was for sure. I couldn't ignore the look in her eyes. To believe. But one thing was for sure. I couldn't ignore the look in her eyes. If you want to know what happened when I stayed seated and why this flight changed every part of my life, stay with me. And don't forget to subscribe and comment your state or city below. This is a story the world needs to hear. The napkin lay on my lap like a ticking time bomb, every word repeating in my mind. You are not safe. Fake that you are sick. Get off this plane immediately. My instinct screamed at me to do something, but logic kept me frozen in place. I subtly looked toward Asha, the flight attendant, who was near the kitchen area, with her back straight and her eyes fixed, not on me, but on 2 passengers sitting 3 rows ahead. Her posture wasn't relaxed. She was on guard, as if getting ready for something to happen. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe she gave the note to the wrong person. Maybe it wasn't even for me. But then she turned around again, and for a split second, her eyes locked with mine, and I saw something that broke every excuse forming in my thoughts. Pure fear. That wasn't the face of someone playing a joke. That was the face of someone trying to save a life. I looked around the cabin for anything strange. A man in a gray hoodie sat stiffly in a window seat, his hands holding the edge of the armrests as if bracing for a crash. Across the aisle, a woman in a business suit kept quickly tapping her foot, looking toward the front of the plane instead of focusing on her book. But what made my skin crawl was the man in the black jacket near the emergency exit. He wasn't nervous. He was too calm, too focused. His gaze kept moving toward the cockpit door and then toward Asha, as if waiting for a sign. I moved in my seat and tried to steady my breathing. There had to be a sensible explanation. Maybe someone on board was having a medical emergency or a mental crisis. Maybe. And then I noticed something that made my heart jump. The overhead compartments above the first-class cabin had been closed tight with bright yellow zip ties, something I'd only seen once during an in-flight safety training video. My nursing experience had taught me to read situations quickly. Something wasn't right here. Something was being contained, watched, controlled. Before I could think about it, Asha suddenly came near me, pretending to check my seatbelt. She leaned in, her voice very quiet. Do it now. Say you feel faint. If you stay on this flight, you won't land alive. I wanted to talk, to ask questions, but her expression stopped me. It wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for me. She stood up straight, smiled mechanically, and continued down the aisle. My body tingled with adrenaline. I slowly reached out to press the call button to signal that I needed help, but before pressing it I stopped. If this was real, what if calling attention made things worse? What if faking sickness started the danger she was warning me about? My fingers touched the button when a loud thud echoed from the back of the plane, as if someone had dropped something heavy. Instantly all heads turned. A male flight attendant rushed toward the noise, and I caught a glimpse of his pale face. Behind him, the teenager who had been holding his backpack was breathing fast into his hands. His eyes moved with panic, but his panic didn't seem like fear of flying. It looked like fear of being discovered. He kept whispering to himself, "I can't do this. Can't do this," as if someone had forced him onto the plane against his will. Suddenly, the plane's engines changed sound as it began moving faster toward the runway. My heart pounded. This was it. Once the plane was in the air, any chance of safe help would disappear. I looked out the window at the terminal we were leaving behind and realized with a deep certainty that I was about to make the most important decision of my life. Then my phone vibrated in my hand with a text from my sister. "Send me a picture of the plane. Want to post it before Mom sees you." A moment of painful clarity washed over me. I had no idea. Of painful clarity washed over me. I had no idea. No one did. I quickly typed, "Something's wrong. Pray for me." My finger hovered. Then I hit send. As the plane turned onto the runway, I suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. Not faked but real, brought on by pure terror. My vision got blurry, and I realized doing nothing was the most dangerous choice of all. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up, shaking. A few passengers turned to look at me with annoyance, thinking I was causing a delay, but I didn't care. As I moved into the aisle, the man in the black jacket slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were cold, judging. Jacket slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were cold, judging, like a hunter noticing an unexpected move from its target. At that very moment, Asha appeared at my side, placing a firm hand on my arm, not to stop me but to guide me. Her voice was calm, but her words were scary. "Follow me if you want to live." Asha kept her hand firmly on my arm, as if helping a sick passenger, but the grip was too purposeful to be only supportive. The eyes of the man in the black jacket flickered with suspicion as he slowly rose from his seat, pretending to stretch. All my senses went on high alert. Asha guided me toward the front of the plane, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "Ma'am, take a deep breath. We'll get you some water. But just as we reached the kitchen area, she leaned in and whispered in a low, urgent tone. Don't look back. Someone is watching you. Your seat was not given by accident. My chest tightened as I sat in the jump seat near the exit door. The male flight attendant moved to her side, pretending to get oxygen. Asha's lips barely moved as she continued. The person targeting that seat believes you are someone else. If you stay on this flight or go back to your seat, they will act during cruising altitude. My thoughts raced. How could my seat be the target? It was a clear case of mistaken identity. And if I was sitting in a seat meant for another person, who was that seat for? Asha reached into a compartment and subtly slid a small device toward her coworker. A silent signal passed between them. The coworker nodded and quickly walked away. As the plane continued to move, I watched Asha's professional calm begin to break. Her breathing quickened slightly as she made a call to the cockpit, asking for an emergency return to the gate because of a medical problem. The captain's voice responded with hesitation, asking for confirmation, and that's when I saw it. Asha looked over my shoulder past the curtain and locked eyes with someone. The expression on her face got hard. The captain then announced we were having a short delay and would be going back to the gate. The feeling instantly changed. Passengers began murmuring with annoyance, complaining loudly. But beneath the surface noise, I sensed something deeper. Panic from certain individuals whose plans were being stopped. The man in the black jacket was fully standing now. His calm attitude was gone. He looked toward the cockpit door, then toward me, then toward the overhead bins, as if figuring out every angle behind him. The quiet teenager held his backpack even tighter, his lips moving fast, as if he were praying. The woman in the business suit pulled out her phone and began angrily texting. Her hands were shaking. Asha placed herself between me and the aisle, blocking their line of sight, as if she knew any sudden move toward the exit could cause chaos. You have to choose right now, she whispered, while keeping a professional smile for looks. If you get off this plane, your life will be turned upside down. But if you stay, you won't get another chance to make it out alive. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of my mother waiting in New York, thinking I was only a few hours away. I thought of my sister, probably laughing in her dorm room, editing a funny video about surprising Mom. Then I thought about the fact that if Asha was right, my family would never see me again. The plane was turning back toward the terminal, but we were still moving. If the threat was desperate, they might act before we reached the gate. Asha unbuckled her belt and moved to the intercom. Her voice remained professional, but I noticed the slight shake in it as she said, "Flight attendants, prepare doors for arrival." The engine slowed. The runway lights reflected in the windows. Suddenly, the teenager stood up quickly, his face pale. "I need to get off this plane, please," he said loudly. His voice cracked with real terror. A wave of confusion spread through the cabin. It was clear now. He wasn't the only one who had been warned or threatened. Before anyone else could react, the man in the black jacket reached into his carry-on bag with a deliberate movement. Asha immediately stepped forward, raising her hand sharply. "Sir, please take your seat," she ordered. But he froze in the middle of the motion when he noticed the cockpit door open and two uniformed air marshals silently enter the aisle from first class. That's when I realized this whole situation was far more complicated than the action of a single crew member. There was already an active federal operation happening, and somehow I had been placed right in the middle of it. As the air marshals moved down the aisle, having been disguised as regular passengers until that moment, Asha looked at me and said softly but firmly, "You were never the target, but now you are the key." My breath caught. Every nerve in my body told me that this moment, right here, was the dividing line between my old life and whatever came next. I nodded once. "I want to get off this plane," I said out loud, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. That sentence was my decision. Asha breathed out as if she'd been holding her breath. She stepped aside, signaling the air marshal. The plane hadn't even fully stopped before the marshal secured the aisle and got ready for immediate evacuation. I had made my choice, and there was no going back. The plane had barely come to a full stop when everything exploded at once. The seatbelt signs were still on, but 2 federal air marshals were already moving down the aisle with controlled speed. Passengers hadn't been told the true reason for our return, so confusion spread in murmurs that quickly turned to alarm when one of the marshals reached the row where the man in the black jacket was sitting. Instead of following orders, the man slowly rose, his expression unreadable, almost bored. His cold eyes shifted first to me, then to the cockpit, then back to the approaching marshal. In that instant, his hand moved quickly into his jacket. Before he could pull anything out, the marshal shouted an order, and the man froze, realizing he had been outsmarted. But that was only the first trigger. A second man sitting near the emergency exit suddenly jumped for the door handle. The whole cabin gasped. A flight attendant jumped forward to block him, but he pushed her back with surprising force. The teenager in the back yelled, "Don't open it. It's not what you think." His voice wasn't one of fear, it was devastation, as if he knew something horrible was about to happen. Passengers began to panic, some ducking, others screaming. Children were crying. The woman in the business suit, who had been nervously texting, stood up and tried to push her way through the crowd, only to be held back by a second marshal. She screamed, "You don't understand, it's about to turn on." Her face had gone white. The words sent a cold shock through me. Activate. What was about to turn on? I looked at Asha, who was already urgently pressing the intercom. Her voice was firm. "Stay in your seats. Do not touch any overhead compartments." Her calm tone didn't match the fear in her eyes. She took a step into the aisle and nodded to one of the marshals, who then reached up and pulled down a specific overhead compartment, the one directly above where I had originally been assigned. Inside was not a bag. It was a sealed, wired device the size of a lunchbox, with a small blinking light. The cabin went silent. People stared in disbelief. The man in the black jacket smiled, not with victory, but with the satisfaction that we had finally seen the truth. He had waited for this moment. The agents moved with quick precision. One secured the man by zip-tying his hands behind his back as he stared blankly forward, as if he had already accepted his fate. While the teenager continued to repeat, "I wasn't supposed to be here today. They changed the flight. They changed the target." His voice trembled with guilt. He wasn't a helper. He was a witness. Or worse, someone forced into helping. The cockpit door burst open and the captain stepped out, his face pale. He looked straight at Asha. "Is it on?" he asked. She nodded seriously. The tension in the air was suffocating. Asha turned to me with a look that made my heart turn over. "That device was placed below seat 14C, your seat." My breath caught. I had been given 14C that morning after changing my reservation to an earlier flight to surprise my mother. My seat change hadn't been random. It had been intercepted. If I hadn't gotten that napkin, if I had stayed seated, if Asha hadn't noticed the change, I wouldn't have gotten off that plane alive. But the nightmare didn't end there. As police began getting passengers off row by row, the woman in the business suit continued screaming to anyone who would listen. "It's turned on from a distance. Is anyone on the ground?" Those words started a fresh wave of terror. The marshals immediately moved, alerting ground control. Emergency response units surrounded the plane. Everyone was being led out the back door farthest from the device. When my turn came, Asha placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Her voice was low and steady. "It was never about you. They thought a federal informant would be sitting in your seat, someone with secret documents. They targeted Flight 14 for a political killing. You unknowingly got on in their place." As we walked out onto the jet bridge, I saw 3 men in tactical gear running down the hallway toward the terminal. Something was still happening. I heard shouts from the gate area. People were running. The teenager, now in protective custody, looked at me with tears in his eyes and said more to himself than anyone. They said no one would know. They said no one would get hurt except the target. It became clear that this wasn't random violence. It was a planned hit, designed to look like an in-air accident, a secret operation, and I had nearly been the face on every news broadcast in the country. Just as I fully entered the terminal, my phone, still in airplane mode, vibrated repeatedly the moment it reconnected to service. Texts from my mother, my sister, missed calls from unknown numbers. Then a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I hit play. My hands were shaking. A changed voice said, "Moment." Every sound felt far away, as if I were underwater. The voicemail kept repeating in my mind, "This isn't over." My hands were shaking not just because of what almost happened, but because of the reality that I had unknowingly walked into something far bigger than myself. An agent with a firm but kind expression approached me and said they were moving me to a secure holding area away from the public. She explained that the suspects were part of a domestic extremist group that had been planning targeted attacks disguised as aviation accidents. They had found a specific federal whistleblower who was supposed to be traveling on this flight under a protected identity. That whistleblower had cancelled at the last minute without their knowledge. My seat, the one they targeted, was originally given to him. That's when it hit me. I was alive not by luck, but because a woman I had never met chose to act on feeling rather than on routine. If Asha had ignored her instinct, if she had shrugged off the seat change, if she had been 1 minute too late, I would have been part of a breaking news headline, not a living person telling my story. As federal agents led me away, I walked past hugging families, passengers crying with relief, and people angrily demanding answers from airline staff. Their lives had been interrupted, their travel plans ruined, but in time they would understand. Those problems had saved them. I was taken to a small private room where I finally saw Asha again. She no longer wore the calm expression of a flight attendant. She was an undercover federal agent. And that napkin wasn't just a warning. It was the first step in saving hundreds of lives that day. When our eyes met, I broke down. Not with fear this time, but with thanks. She walked over and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "I need you to know something," she said softly. "You were never supposed to be in danger. But when I saw the look in your eyes, I knew you were strong enough to hear the truth." Her words settled in my heart. All my life I had been the one helping others, patients, families, strangers in crisis. But that day I had to trust someone else to save me. Over the next few hours I gave my statement. I learned that the teenager had been pressured by the extremist group and had subtly tried to signal his distress by holding his backpack. The woman in the business suit was actually an undercover agent from another branch, watching the suspects from a different angle. Multiple agencies had been tracking this operation for weeks. The decision to stop the flight wasn't random. It was started the moment Asha slipped me that napkin, because I reacted, because I moved, because I didn't ignore the warning signs. What I thought was fear turned into my greatest protection. What I thought was panic was actually clarity. Later that night, I was taken to a secure hotel with federal protection. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone was constantly buzzing with messages from family and friends who had seen the breaking news about a major threat stopped at ATL. My sister finally connected on a protected line, crying with relief. My mother's voice cracked when she heard mine. I felt the tears fall down my face as I realized how close I had come to never hearing her voice again. I expected to feel weak, traumatized, broken, but instead I felt something unexpected. Purpose. If this had been my last day on Earth, I would have left without telling the world what I had seen, what I had learned. That danger often hides behind ordinary moments, that a single warning can save your life if you are willing to listen. In the days that followed, I worked with authorities as they took apart the larger network behind the attack. My story was never released with all the details because of ongoing investigations, but what I experienced changed the direction of my life. I stopped living passively. I started paying attention, not with fear but with awareness. I promised myself I would never again dismiss my instincts or ignore the signals others tried to give me. Today I share this story because you deserve to know that sometimes your life depends on a choice you never expected to make. You may never be handed a napkin with a warning written on it, but you might feel uneasy in a situation, notice something strange, or hear a voice inside you telling you to act. Don't ignore it. Your gut feeling is not panic. It is protection. And sometimes protection comes in the form of a stranger begging you to listen. If this story opened your eyes or made you feel grateful to be alive today, make sure to subscribe right now and comment where you're watching from. Your comment might remind someone else to pay attention, and that reminder could save a life. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.